Welcome everyone to week 12. My name is Trenton and I'm coming to you live from the void of performance management right here. I do not have a green screen. I just now exist within PowerPoint slides exclusively. I've been absorbed by Microsoft. And so this is the only way you'll be able to see me from now on, and that's okay. Today we're talking about performance management. Performance management is one of the most difficult and misunderstood components of a successful strategic human resources management program. And it's also important for you to understand as future employees to understand why performance management is important and to understand where your role as an employee or as a supervisor may fit into it. We'll close today by talking a little bit about our Build a City program and talk about our expectations for those deliverables as we move along. So we'll go ahead and start right here. Performance management, just like everything else we've talked about, is a systematic process. And it is performance management is systematic, it is collaborative, and it is goal oriented. We are talking about what are the objectives of the organization that we are trying to accomplish. This definition is from the Office of Personnel Management, and they're talking about the effectiveness of agencies. But we can talk about effectiveness both from an individual employee's perspective, a team's perspective, or an organization or agency-wide perspective as well. So performance evaluation can accomplish a bunch of different things. It can assist agencies in accomplishing their mission, what they've set out to do. It can also provide feedback to the agency about whether our HRM systems are actually working to execute the agency's mission. This allows us to understand whether all of the stuff that we've talked about so far in this class actually matters. Then we provide management with essential information to make strategic decisions about employees, whether that's promoting and advancing those employees, whether we're trying to retain employees, or whether we need to separate with certain employees. It's an important component here. And then it also provides feedback and information to employees about their performance and how and educates them on how their performance fits in with the larger organizational goals. And then, of course, for planning and research, performance evaluation is really, really critical to be able to make those long-term planning decisions. When we talk about performance, we're talking about motivation. We're talking about what are the reasons why employees want to be better or get good performance evaluations at work. Sometimes there's those intrinsic rewards, the reasons why we feel personally motivated to accomplish something, and then there's extrinsic rewards, or such as pay bonuses or job promotions that we're looking for, the things that we're seeing as a result of our performance. And then what we'll talk today about the issues with the efficacy of a lot of performance evaluation systems, particularly with how raters in the process don't engage with the system or aren't engaged with the system enough to make it actually useful. So when we're talking about performance evaluation, like I said, we're talking about motivation. And essentially, there's a couple of different theories of motivation that we'll touch on at a high level in the SHRM world. The first is our content theory. So the personal characteristics or attributes that explain the motivation, the content, the thing that we're trying to accomplish when we are motivated to do something, whether we're trying to find an activated need, such as food, water, safety, or there's some sort of internal motivation around self-confidence or maybe public service motivation that helps explain why employees behave certain ways. There are also process theories, which concentrate on the cognitive and behavioral processes behind a motivation. This is talking about why we contribute more effort than we normally do. Why do we hold ourselves to certain levels of performance and not other levels? Are we being treated fairly, and are we treating others fairly? And is our work contributing to these goals? All important components to motivation. When we develop an evaluation program within an organization, unfortunately, this is one of those systems where it's hard to look and say, this is the standard way by which performance is evaluated, because every organization behaves and engages in performance evaluation in different ways. When we're looking at federal government, performance evaluation is often tied to pay. This was some of the personnel reforms that we saw in the later half of the 20th century, where we're talking about pay for performance. We're trying to find a way to say, by achieving these specific outcomes, we will pay these employees more. State and local governments often don't have the resources or the scalability of their organization to achieve that specific level of performance evaluation. And so you'll see across different states and localities that for formal performance evaluation may not even exist, or performance evaluations actually determined by collective bargaining and civil service systems that determine promotions and pay increases. So think about this, such as with public school teachers, whose performance evaluations actually set in in large part by the collective bargaining agreement that the teachers union negotiated with the district or school. When they are being evaluated for their performance, a lot of times the system by which they are promoted or their pay is increased is already predetermined by a CBA, and so it may lessen the importance of the performance evaluation itself. And then in nonprofits, we kind of take the issues that we see at the state and local level, and we ramp them up to 10,000 because organizations, especially nonprofit organizations, often are not big enough or have enough organizational sophistication to have a formal evaluation system, and it's often based more off of performance improvement rather than evaluation. We're also going to talk about raters and ratees when it comes to performance evaluation. Raters are your supervisors, the ones doing the actual evaluating of someone else's performance, and then ratees are the ones receiving that performance evaluation. And for the most part, both of those parties hate the evaluation system and the evaluation process. Part of it is because most of the time performance evaluation processes and systems are not created collaboratively with the employees in mind. And then one of the issues we run into and why you don't see a large standardized system for performance evaluation across organization is that the integrity of these systems, whether or not these systems are fair and they actually work, is completely dependent on whether or not the people involved in the evaluation process, your supervisors and your employees, understand the objective of the evaluation program. And as we've talked about, that is rarely the case. So ratees are the ones receiving an evaluation. This is most likely where a lot of people will start before they have a managerial post. They are the ones receiving a performance evaluation. When ratees are trained on the performance evaluation system, they're more likely to be committed to the goals of that system in the first place. So if I know that the goal of this performance evaluation system, and I understand this system, and I understand that the goal is to, improve this specific outcome for the organization, I'm more likely to be committed to achieving that outcome. Ratees need to understand why evaluation is actually happening, how it'll be used, and what their role in the process is. One of the biggest fears that you'll see when it comes to performance evaluation, especially in organizations that are looking to create a performance evaluation system, is this a punitive measure? And in a lot of ways, the traditional use of performance evaluation was a punitive measure. It was about identifying poor performing employees and either replacing or focusing efforts to improve that specific employee's performance. That's not necessarily the case when we're looking at a strategic systematic evaluation system. And then training informs ratees of the levels of performance that's expected of them. If employees do not understand what they're supposed to be accomplishing and at what capacity or skill level, it's hard for them to achieve those specific outcomes. And so training ratee is training those employees on the process is critical. Just as critical is training our raters, the people actually performing the evaluation. So these managers, the low-level, mid-level, high-level managers who are evaluating other employees' performance, need to also be trained on the development of those standards and objectives. Like we talked about way back in week 3, 4, 5 with pay for performance, one of the conclusions that you all drew in your conversation was that setting performance standards and objectives is hard to be fair in a lot of modern day work because of the general ambiguity of of standardizing those objectives are. And so being able to develop standards and objectives for individual employees is a really important skill that our managers need to have. Managers should also learn how to complete an evaluation instrument, how to use the specific evaluative tools that have been provided to them, how to give the feedback, and how to avoid errors and subjective or subjectivity within a process. And then um, we also need to train up our managers, our raters, because we want to remove as much personal bias from the rating process as possible. Um, there are a number of different biases, and later on in the PowerPoint, we'll talk about. There's a link to a bunch of different biases that we'll have. But when we're talking about rating errors, here are some of the most common ones you're seeing. You may see a halo or horns effect, where you're saying that employees really good at one thing, which influences the rater, the manager, to give employees similar ratings on other qualities that they may not actually be as excel or may not excel as much in. Horns is the exact opposite. An employee who's really bad at this one thing and it drags down the performance in all the other fields. There's also the logic error. Um, this is where you're evaluating different criteria and different behaviors, and the manager confuses one performance dimension with another, and this is really hard, especially in human and customer service focused positions, because those interactions are harder to differentiate. You're often using multiple performance dimensions within one behavior. And then there's the central tendency error, which provides a rating of average or midpoint for all qualities. This is just the nature of saying that if you know that to pass a performance evaluation, you need 5 out of 10 across the board, your tendency is to draw everything towards that 5 rather than truly evaluating performance. You also have strict rating, which is rating employees consistently lower than normal or average. This can happen especially if you have managers that have not been fully trained and do not buy into the performance evaluation culture. The same goes with lenient rating, where we're constantly evaluating higher than normal or average. Then we have the latest behavior error, which is based off of the most recent behavior that you saw, rather than the cumulative impact of the behavior that employee may have. Then initial impression is the exact opposite. We have a latency and primacy effect here going on, and so initial impression is that primacy effect where we're failing to recognize consistently demonstrated behaviors because of that first behavior. When we're talking about who should be a ratee, a lot of times we're talking about a manager and their subordinate employee, but actually in our modern system, you may have more of a broader understanding of who should be the raters in the process. So supervisors, obviously the ones responsible for employees' performance, but it may be difficult if those supervisors are unable to observe performance directly. You may have 360-degree evaluations where everyone an employee interacts with helps in part of an evaluation. So this involves your supervisors, your coworkers, your customers, other professionals you work with, and your subordinates. Subordinate evaluation is actually a really important one for leadership and training or leadership development, because you're asking the employees of a specific manager how they are behaving and whether or not they're achieving those leadership outcomes you're looking for. And then there's self-appraisal. This is something that has been tried and tried and tried over and over again, to give employees the opportunity to rate themselves and then compare that to either a supervisor's rating or a 360-degree rating that tells a different story, and making sure that their perspective of themselves is aligned with the perspective of them from others. Within local governments, performance management is a really, really important component to advancing the organization. Within local government nowadays, you have an adapt or die sort of mentality that change is just the way the way that life works now for most local governments, and so understanding where we want to be and how we're going to get there involves understanding the performance of our employees of our organization. So why do we measure? Where we want to understand whether or not we're actually accomplishing our goals, right? We can't just say, our goal is to do this without the data to back it up. We're collecting this outcome data also helps tie reporting more directly to the strategic planning, right? We are setting our objectives based off of our strategic outcomes that we're looking for. Performance management is not an all at once or large jurisdiction only endeavor. This is actually something that you can build into smaller organizations, but just this has traditionally been not been prioritized as part of a developing organization. It's also important to remember that, especially if you're in an organization, local government or otherwise, that is still growing in sophistication, it may take time to collect actual actionable data. Um, you may not actually have enough data to take action on organizational objectives immediately, but continuing to invest in collecting that data is worth more because it allows us to make informed decisions. And then, of course, in government, we always want to be transparent, and we encourage transparency through performance management by engaging our staff, by engaging our elected officials, and engaging the public around our strategic priorities. Um, this one is close to my heart, but one of the issues you'll run into, especially at the executive level, is what an executive evaluation should actually look like. So I will take city managers as our case study here. So remember, city managers are those executives that have been formally trained, that are professionals in management of municipalities, of local governments. And they are hired directly by the elected board of representatives, whether that's a city council, whether that's a town board, anything like that. It's important to understand, what the expectations of that board are for the city manager and how the city manager is responding to that. Um, for city managers, there are a number of core competencies that you'll often see in their performance evaluations. And for most city managers, you can actually go and view their performance evaluations as a matter of the public record. So, for example, you might see, how do they manage their relationship with those elected officials? This is a critical one and requires a little bit of introspection from elected officials, something that we don't often see. How are they managing the organization fiscally? Are they being good stewards of public funds? How are they planning for the future? Do they have a long-term vision, or are they more focused on being reactive? How are they interacting with the public? How are they interacting with their staff? Does the staff respond well to their leadership? How do they communicate with with the board, with the public, or with their staff? What are the interpersonal skills that they demonstrate? And the basic duties that city managers have around being a policy advisor for the elected board, preparing a budget, executing policy direction. Those are ones that you'll see oftentimes in those evaluative systems. Nonprofit executives have very similar competencies and must report similarly to a board of directors, much like a city manager does. So you'll see nonprofit executives evaluated on accomplishment of specific objectives. How are they managing the program? How are they managing the organization financially? Are they effective at fundraising? A huge part of nonprofit executive management is being a strong fundraiser. How do they manage their relationship with their board of directors? And then what are the external relations? Are they managing the public image of the nonprofit well? As we've talked about, the nonprofit sector is an incredibly competitive sector right now. And so understanding how an executive is contributing to their image and their pitch to the public is really important. For more information, again, I'm not an expert on nonprofits. And so for more information on performance evaluation for nonprofits, you can go to the Council of Nonprofits, or look at specific state organizations like the Maine Association for Nonprofits. When we're talking about executive performance, you're actually likely working off of what's called a performance-based management system, a PBMS. This shifts the manager's focus, that executive focus, from the inputs and the work that's being done to the measurement results and outcomes. This is being an outcome-driven leader as opposed to an input-driven leader. This model of management ties specific elements of an executive's performance to higher level goals and organizational objectives. So our top level goal is maximize organizational effectiveness, right? And then you are then looking at a number of different success goals that you'll evaluate the manager based off of. So providing providing best value to our customers, structuring internal processes to deliver outcomes effectively and efficiently, empowering and enabling the workforce to deliver services now and in the future. You can start seeing where those strategic goals come in. Once you have those success goals, then you have metrics you're actually looking at. How are we measuring it? So the percentage of accurate responses made in 24 hours, the maximum percentage of responses with fewer than 4 authorizations. These sort of things you may see within a performance evaluation hierarchy, and what you want to then be able to do is a lot of times quantify that effectiveness, right? What is the score that we're seeing? How is it being weighted, and how does it contribute to that top level goal? And so, in this, in Webb and Blandon's example, they actually have a formula and a weighting system by which they are taking in those scores to determine what their evaluation actually is. One of the things I want to emphasize here is that. Without properly training your board, your directors, or your elected officials, this can actually be really difficult to accomplish. One of the things that has been a point of conversation within my city for a while is the ability to attract retail establishments to our city. Whether that be shopping opportunities, increasing the amount of grocery stores in the city, that sort of thing. It is a huge priority, but it is also not something that is completely within the power of the city. The city still exists within a free market system, and so all we can do is nudge the market and hope to achieve those specific those outcomes through those nudges. One of the things that could potentially happen is that without proper training, the elected officials evaluating the performance of an executive may try to tie those specific outcomes to their performance. Unfortunately, that's just not a fair way to determine performance about whether or not they can achieve goals that are outside of their power. And so properly training our executives and our boards on performance evaluation is really important, and creates very much a chicken and egg sort of situation between the elected officials who are hiring an employee who is then training them on how to evaluate that employee's performance. When we talk about performance evaluation, documentation is also critical too, and this is something that may not happen regularly if the organizational culture does not encourage or support a lot of buy-in to our performance evaluation. So this involves documenting both positive and negative performance performance as it occurs, providing continuous feedback, not just that annual feedback that you may see later on. Justifying our ratings, using this documentation to justify saying an employee is over or underperforming is really important, especially if you've got pay systems tied to that performance evaluation. And then it all contributes to clear, relevant, specific feedback that you can provide to your employees later on. When we're reviewing our performance evaluation system, you have to understand how both raters and ratees are interpreting our evaluation. And so when an evaluation comes around, whether it's an annual, monthly, a quarterly, a biannually, whatever it may be, there has to be some sort of review period between the rater and the ratee, and both have to be bought into it. Employees should be given advance notice of when a review is scheduled so that they can prepare and provide in the documentation they need. This may also involve a self-evaluation as well. Does an employee conduct a self-evaluation that can then be compared to the rater's evaluation? And then this conversation should be focused on specific job-related tasks, responsibilities, and behaviors. This is not saying that in general you're a good or bad employee. It's about saying, I want you to have strong interpersonal skills. Here's how you demonstrate that. You want to be impersonal. You want to focus on performance standards and responsibilities. We don't want to talk about individual employees' attitudes or behaviors unless it affects their performance or responsibilities. You also want to be focused on the goals that you want your employees to achieve, and ensure that they understand what those goals are and how they can improve their performance to get to that outcome. Performance appraisal is an ethically dubious world to live in, particularly because documentation is often not as strong as it needs to be. Because if we are evaluating our employees and there's no documentation to justify why employees are evaluated a certain way, you're allowing these different biases, these different subconscious behaviors to influence instead. So performance documentation can help substantiate our ratings, can hold supervisors accountable for rating employees fairly. It significantly decreases discrimination, especially if you can document exact behaviors. you're talking through the terms specifically of your job descriptions, and there's legal reasons to have this sort of documentation. One of the things that HR professionals deal with quite a bit are conflicts and lawsuits around performance evaluations, and so having this documentation is really important. This link right here is a list of a number of different biases that may come into play. It's kind of fun to click around, so definitely click through that at your own time. When we're evaluating performance, there are a bunch of different techniques we can use, but there's three general approaches. So we have absolute appraisal techniques, which evaluate how an employee performs or behaves without directly referring to other employees. So this is trying to, in a bubble, evaluate one employee without the context of the other employees around them. We can also have comparative methods where we're talking about the behavior of one group or one employee relative to other employees. It's important to do this as impersonally as possible because we don't want to say, well, you're performing worse than Greg is, and so now we're going to dock your pay. It's instead about saying, like, in general, people at this position or your unit is performing less, or is seeing less success and less strong outcomes because compared to other teams or organizations. And then there's goal setting, which focus on whether an employee attained a predetermined goal. Again, really difficult to create, but if you can do it, it is a strong technique to use. And then we have to have the actual instruments that we use for appraisal. So these evaluative instruments include trait rating, behaviorally anchored rating scale. So this is a scale of how an employee behaves. Maybe an essay. It's a narrative form of why you believe an employee has been successful or unsuccessful in achieving outcomes. If you have this, what is the data? What are the standards that you're supposed to meet, and how does your quantifiable data compare? Are you managing by objectives? Are there objectives that you can use to say you've achieved these objectives or not achieved these objectives? Are there critical incidents that we have to involve in performance appraisal? So if an incident occurs, do we have to use that as an opportunity to reflect on that employee's performance? And then we have personnel data that we can use to help conduct these appraisals. The behaviorally anchored rating scale, I'm actually not going to go through here, but what I want you to see is we've got a job description here. We've got our lieutenant investigator job, and then we've got the dimension by which we are evaluating their behavior. So designing and reviewing cases to their investigator is the dimension that are evaluating here. And much like when you create a rubric for students, you're saying, here's how I know you did an A, here's how I know you did a B, a C, a D, or an F, right? What are the different barrier, or what are the different check posts we want them to be able to meet with this dimension? And you can see these different levels of structuring out what we're evaluating and why we're evaluating, and then what is the method we use to evaluate that behavior. This is managing by objectives instead here, and so what are the objectives we're looking for? How are we measuring it? What is the current and future state that we want them to achieve, and how often are we evaluating it? And then we have a critical incidents report. So this is a sample of a critical incident report in which something has happened and we've tracked it, and it was a positive or a negative outcome, and that's how we can evaluate behavior. One of the things that we've talked about before, I won't linger on this too much, are team-based performance techniques where we're talking about gain sharing or goal sharing or having a balanced scorecard in terms of achieving specific team outcomes. So in general, when we're talking about performance evaluation, they need to be as close to objective as possible. They need to be related to our jobs and consistent with the organization's mission. The theme, the big takeaway I want you to take away from this class, if you haven't picked up on it already, is that management of our personnel resources must be strategic. We have to understand what our strategic outcomes are for these human resource functions to be successful. Performance management provides management with the important information to make those decisions about hiring, firing employees, about creating new divisions, about affecting specific changes that you're looking to see. We also have to train everyone involved in the process. Raters are the important ones to train up front, but ratees need to be involved and trained in the process as well. And then, understanding the pros and cons of different evaluative systems is really important. So that is what I have for you you on performance evaluation, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about our final project here. So remember, we've created the city of Angel Bend, Colorado. Each of you has been assigned to a different unit that we are going to operate as a fake HR department to be able to accomplish. And so within your unit, you are going to be uh, providing your recommendations and your analysis as if you were an HR unit, as if you were an HR employee, right? We are not focused on, when we're talking about staffing up our public works or public safety departments, we're not focused on, the policy ramifications of these different departments, or maybe the outcomes of those specific departments necessarily. We're talking about what do we need to do? What are the strategic steps we're going to take to stand up these departments within your particular unit? So within performance evaluation, for example, you are making recommendations to City Council as to how you will go about evaluating the performance of your public safety and public works employees as you create this new city, right? We are writing as HR employees. We are not writing as students or as researchers. Our recommendations are based off of background information, applicable laws, research, and best practices, right? This is your final exam, for lack of a better comparison, right? This is how I'm going to be able to check that you have the proper competencies. This is how I'm understanding whether you're achieving the specific outcomes that I want to see you achieve in each of these units. And then please, please, please go read the assignment directions. This is not one where there's going to be a lot of time for reflection. We are going to do an outline. We are going to do a presentation. We are going to do a written report. This just happens one after another. And so please make sure you're reading descriptions and asking questions as it comes up. Remember, we're presenting as a city council, so the written component is one part, but this presentation is something I'm going to be looking for. We've already done a presentation. You've received feedback on it. One of the general pieces of advice that I want to provide for you is please practice your presentations. Please sit down and run through your presentations to understand that you're, A, hitting the time limit, B, providing enough information, and you're not overwhelming the city council with information. We've got a couple of students who actively work in local governments, and so they may have presented to city council before, but in general, here's what this presentation can look like. So the first is you want a cover slide, saying, thank you for having me, city council. This is why I'm here. The purpose slide and the questions you want council to consider. One of the things that I have learned through my numerous presentations to elected officials is they want to know what exactly they're doing there. They don't want to just be lectured at. They want to know you're talking to us because you want us to consider these specific things. So remember, you're providing recommendations about different HR functions. And so your purpose slide is here. I'm here to talk about X type of HR functions within our public works and public safety departments. Here are the considerations I want you to have, and here are my recommendations. Remember, we're talking about strategic outcomes, our council priorities, our approved plans. And so making sure that we're fitting in with those strategic outcomes. One of the things that you'll see on our description is our council strategic plan. And I want you to consider those strategic outcomes when it comes to public works and public safety. What is the background? What is the case, including the research laws, best practices, perhaps case studies that you want to understand in order to provide those recommendations? What are your next steps? What are the options that you're providing to council? And then, we're circling back. What is the question you want council to consider based off of the information you've provided? We do not want to see a significant amount more than 12 slides. I also don't want to see a significant amount less than 12 slides. These are weighty topics that we should not be flying through in 6 slides, but they're also not topics that we want to spend 50 slides talking about. And then always end with a thank you slide, right? For our presentations, we want to keep them to be no more than 15 minutes. Please, please, please practice this up front, right? We do not want to overwhelm our elected officials with this information. We also want our presentations to be visually appealing, but not distracting. If we have a lot of motion, if we have a lot of star wipes in our presentations, it can be distracting for our audience, right? Sits, bullets, mats. As you can see here, I have sits, bullets, but I'm also not presenting to elected officials, and so my rules apply differently. But, in general, we don't want to overwhelm them with information. We want to have visuals. We want to have, data if we can display it. Most of the presentation should be focused on your biggest challenges, your best practices, and your recommendations based off of what we've learned, based off of what you've read in the texts and in the assigned readings. Remember, you're making a pitch. Think about it almost like a Shark Tank pitch, right? You're going to the sharks and saying, "Here's what I am pitching to you. Here's what the questions you should be answering." Please don't watch city council presentations. I am actually going to go and clip one of my presentations to my city council, and also find some other examples from the city of Fort Collins and some other organizations that can show you some pros and cons and kind of see how these city council presentations are supposed to go. Please know your audience and please be persuasive with it. All right. So that is what I have for you today. I want to thank you all for the time you've spent with me, and I'm looking forward to closing out this class with you all. Appreciate you.